Alrighty, what's going on, guys? We're looking at Australia and New Zealand compared. That's right, baby. This is from Mr. Beat. Very cool channel. I've seen some of his stuff on American topics before, so I expect this to be pretty good. I think it will be. This looks like a pretty extensive video, 25 minutes. So grab something to drink, grab a snack, strap in. This should be interesting because these two countries are awesome. And if you look in the thumbnail over here, I view this as similar to kind of the U.S. and Canada. Both great friends, great nations, and, they're neighbors, just like Australia and New Zealand. And, you have New Zealand and Canada with like a very high quality of life, and they are the smaller neighbor of the bigger neighbor, which would be Australia in this case, and the U.S. being bigger than Canada. So some familiar dynamics here. Let's get straight to it. So remember, this will be linked down in the description. You can check it out further, and his channel. Let's go ahead and look at this. Should be pretty fun.
Australia and New Zealand, two countries in Oceania, more specifically Australasia. Separated by the Tasman Sea, they're two well-developed countries that often rank really high on nearly every quality of life ranking list. And yeah, they're just pretty awesome. Both seem to be kind of far away from the entire rest of the world.
That's what it seems like.
And because of that, also since they're so both unique, kind of in their own little world. Let's first...
That's the very first statement is true. That's what's so interesting and fascinating for me as an American. The Americas are kind of, not at all like Australia and New Zealand, but they're kind of separate from the rest of the world, considering, most of the world is like Europe and Asia and Africa. They're all kind of right there, and the Americas are kind of way out, in the ocean away from them. But it's not like this. There's still a lot going on in the Americas. Australia and New Zealand are truly isolated. It's very fascinating, and that's why they have so many unique animals and vegetation and landscapes. It's truly like these isolated wonderlands, in my opinion, way out in the southern hemisphere. It's very, very interesting, and that's something they share right off the bat. Both beautiful countries, I know that much, and very unique culture and stuff as well.
First, look at some differences between the two. First of all, New Zealand doesn't exist. Okay, that's just basically a meme at this point. This started since...
They're missing on some maps. Like, what the hell? Where are they, right? Very amazing country, very beautiful country. How do you miss them? What is going on here?
So many world maps were leaving out New Zealand. In fact, there's even a large subreddit dedicated to them. But don't believe the hype. New Zealand, in fact, does exist.
Look at how beautiful that is.
There
oh my God.
Australia exists too.
Gorgeous.
But it's about 29 times bigger than New Zealand. It's the 6th largest country in the world,
That's right.
baby. That said, it only has around 5 times as many people.
Interesting.
Why? Well, check this map out. Only 2% of the population of Australia lives in the yellow area.
Wow.
And why does only 2% of the population of Australia live in that yellow area? That's because much of it is desert or near desert. 35% of the Australian continent doesn't get enough rain. But what about up here? Well, few live here mostly because it's so isolated from the rest of the population of Australia.
Right.
Only one metropolitan area in New Zealand has a population over 1 million people. That'd be the magnificent Auckland.
Yeah.
Australia, meanwhile, has 5 metro areas with over 1 million people. Its 2 biggest cities, Sydney and Melbourne, each have more people than the entire country of New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
Being so much bigger, Australia has a wider range of different types of climates. New Zealand has mostly an oceanic climate, whereas Australia, just look at this map here.
Wow.
As I said earlier, much of it is desert or semi-arid. I should probably now bring up the sparsely populated area famously known as the Outback.
The Outback,
While the
baby.
Outback is typically only associated with the dry parts of Australia, it also includes the northern areas of the country that have a savanna climate. Basically, the huge area in Australia where humans don't dare live. It's a magical place. And believe it or not, Australia has a little bit of rainforest and parts of a monsoon climate.
That's what I've learned over the last few months, learning about Australia. I didn't know as much as I should have, and I've learned a lot. And of course, you have tons of deserts and the outback, and then the beautiful coast. but it was very interesting to learn about way up north here, and then especially Queensland. Very tropical, very exotic, very humid, right? Very hot. Very interesting to learn about that region. Tons of interesting vegetation and animals, of course, cassowaries, right? Some crazy stuff going on up there.
Up here, along the eastern coast, southeastern coast, and island state of Tasmania, where most of the population lives, by the way, Australia has a mostly oceanic and humid subtropical climate. But don't forget the lovely Mediterranean climate along parts of the southern and southwestern coasts. That's also where a lot of Australians live. Australia also has a more varied landscape, and this magnificent sandstone formation, Uluru, one of the most important indigenous sites in the country. New Zealand's mountains are way more impressive, and
yeah, sorry, Australia. I am a big mountain guy, and Australia does have some beautiful mesas, beautiful buttes, mountains, hills. Don't get me wrong, they're there. But wow, the majestic, just big, in-your-face mountain landscapes, New Zealand. You're beautiful. New Zealand is gorgeous, and they definitely, I'm sorry, they win on the mountains. It is unbelievable, some of the pictures you can get from New Zealand, some of these valleys with mountains around. It is unbelievable.
Power over Australia's mountains. In fact, many people not from Australia forget that Australia actually has mountains. Meanwhile, everyone seems to know about New Zealand's dramatic mountains, mainly due to the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films. The producer of those films, Peter Jackson, is from New Zealand, and he almost single-handedly put New Zealand on the map due to those films. Remember how I said it's often not on maps? Sorry for the bad joke there. Anyway, you can visit the actual shrine from the film today. And fun fact,
Now, I hate to say this, guys. I know these are super famous. Maybe a lot of you will be really mad at me right now and cuss me out in the comments. Fair be it. But I did not watch these. I think I watched maybe this original one, The Fellowship of the Ring. I think that sounds right. I watched that years and years ago. I'm talking like 15 years ago. I don't even know how old I was. And I just never ended up watching any of these. I know they're really long. I know they're really intense, have a great following. I don't hate them. I just never got into it. So it's not, for bad reasons or anything. I just never got into these guys. But it is cool to see that they were filmed in New Zealand. I mean, looks majestic, looks beautiful. Really, really cool fact for sure.
Uncles lived in New Zealand while they worked on the Lord of the Rings films. What was I talking about again?
Wow.
Oh, yes. Mountains.
Jeez.
New Zealand's
beautiful.
Highest peak is around 1,500 meters taller than Australia's highest.
Yeah, and see, that's legit. So 7,300 feet in Australia, the tallest mountain. Of course, that's not short. That is legit. That is a legitimate mountain. That is pretty tall. But in the grand scope of mountains, someone from America, we have extremely tall mountains. 12,200 feet, that's more like it. That is legit. That is crazy looking. Look at how majestic it is. Look at how big it is. That is like up there with the big boys. And this is definitely more short. So it is kind of mind-blowing that you have all that land in Australia, but that is the tallest mountain. And then New Zealand has this little, these two islands basically, and they still have some extreme mountains going on. Very interesting, the difference there, for sure.
Peak? Well, mainland Australia, at least. No one seems to care about you, Mawson Peak. Way over on Australia's Heard Island.
Oh, what? That's way out there. You saw that? Now, that's something I don't know about. But if it's part of Australia, it's part of Australia.
Island. New Zealand sits on the infamous Ring of Fire, an area where lots of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions tend to occur. Australia doesn't have to worry about volcanoes. Also, since Australia sits on top of a very stable tectonic plate with no active faults, residents there don't have to worry much about large earthquakes.
That's
New
good.
Zealanders, on the other hand, have to worry about a major earthquake at least once every 10 years.
Oh, no.
Related to this, both Australia and New Zealand occasionally have to worry about tsunamis. Australia gets hit more by cyclones, while both countries have to worry about floods and wildfires. Australia is more often in the news for them. Also, while bushfires are a regular thing in Australia, it had one of the worst bushfire seasons in recorded history from September 2019 to March 2020. It was catastrophic.
That's terrible.
And it bit horrifying, to say the least. New Zealand is made up of
Jeez.
islands. Australia is mostly made up of a continent.
Well, actually, some
It's
people
an
actually
island.
call Australia a really big island.
Well, that's preposterous. What a silly notion. Australia is clearly a continent.
I mean, I agree with you, but that doesn't stop the millions of people out there from calling it an island.
Well, someone needs to stop them.
Biggest
Liam,
island in the
you must
world.
stop them.
Well, I don't know if that's possible, Mr. Beat. However, I can make a video looking at why some people think Australia is an island.
Right on.
Come on, you got to tell me in the comments down below. Is Australia an island? Tell me down below.
Can you have it done by the time I'm
I'm
done
going
with
with
this video?
yes.
I'll see what I can do.
Dang, that's awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how that turns out. So anyway, like I said, Australia is also mainly a continent, the oldest, flattest, and driest continually inhabited continent with the worst soil for farming.
Oh,
and
no.
yes, New Zealand
Wow.
is made up of islands, around 600 of them, and they're mostly remnants of a bigger landmass under the sea.
That is interesting to think if all of it was above sea level, New Zealand could be actually pretty big, right? In a way different shape. Very interesting when you think about that, how a lot of land masses around the world are underwater. Very weird.
Called Zealandia. Of those 600, however, only 13 are inhabited by
Wow.
humans.
Okay.
Most of the population of New Zealand lives on the Big Two, the two larger main islands, the North Island, or Te Maui, and South Island, or Te Waipounamu. Oh yeah? Well, Australia actually has 8,222 islands, so it's so much more than just a measly continent. Many seem to forget that New Zealand is lower in latitude.
Yeah.
I mean, higher in latitude. God.
I make this mistake a lot. I know when you see it on a map correctly, New Zealand's way down here. Like it's more level with Tasmania than it is with mainland Australia. In my head, for whatever reason, I don't know why, if you look at my mouse cursor, I always think New Zealand's like up here, like way like straight across, straight level. But it's not. It's way down here. Really, really weird when you actually see how it is.
That's confusing. It's higher in latitude than most of Australia. Further south, okay?
What?
Latitude-wise, Australia is more African than European, by the way. Australia borders the Indian Ocean. New Zealand borders the Pacific Ocean. East of New Zealand is just... Wow, quite a bit
nothing.
of ocean there. And quite a bit of ocean west of Australia,
wild?
too. Australians are often called Aussies, and New Zealanders are often called
Kiwis.
That name comes from the kiwi, a flightless bird native to the country that's also a national symbol. Here is a kiwi holding
Look
a
at that.
kiwi. New Zealand
Nice.
is growing at a faster rate. Maybe why?
Wow, no kidding. I would not have guessed that. New Zealand right now is growing at a faster rate, supposedly, than Australia. Very, very interesting. I wonder what that's driven by. Just people wanting to get away to an island place like New Zealand, or if it's like some business deal, companies moving there. What's the story? Very, very interesting there.
Why is because the cost of living is lower in New Zealand.
No
Not
way.
only that, but residents there generally pay lower taxes than residents.
Okay, I would not have guessed that. I feel like by now, learning about so much about Australian stuff, I would have known this, but I did not for some reason. I really, really would have assumed New Zealand was more expensive, because I thought I've heard of people moving from New Zealand to Australia to escape an expensive way of life, basically. So this could be wrong. It could be half right, half wrong. You're going to have to tell me down below in your experience.
Residents in Australia. Australia has a higher GDP per capita. That said, wealth inequality is a bit worse there. Also, New Zealand spends a higher percentage of its total GDP on education. Major industries in Australia include mining, energy, manufacturing, and financial services. Major industries in New Zealand include agriculture, forestry, tourism, and food processing. guessing.
Wow.
New Zealand generally has faster internet
Really?
speeds. While sheep outnumber humans in Australia 3-1, sheep outnumber humans in New Zealand 6-1. Residents of Australia are generally more religious. The biggest religion there is Christianity. Within that group, most are Protestant. Almost half of New Zealanders have no religion. There's no big highway that goes straight through Australia east to west. I mean, there's the Outback Highway, a series of roads and dirt tracks that link the east and west, but I ain't trusting that, dude.
This sounds very sketchy.
I ain't trusting that, dude.
That sounds like just bad news, trying to go east to west on some Outback road. Yeah, even I know from afar, that sounds like, dare I say, just like a mission set up for failure. But yeah, he's going to show this. I know that Highway 1 goes pretty much all around the whole thing. Very fascinating.
A north-south highway that links Adelaide and Darwin.
That's cool.
Stewart Highway.
Stewart Highway, yeah.
The track. It's just a 31-hour drive. There's a weird tradition in New Zealand of going places without shoes, apparently. You know, I think they're onto something there. New Zealand legalized same-sex marriage more than 4 years before Australia. Australia has possibly the world's longest fence, meant to prevent the dingoes from killing sheep in the southeastern part of the country. In fact, it's even called the dingo fence. Due to its long geographic isolation, most of Australia's mammals, amphibians, and reptiles are uniquely native to it.
Hey, shout out to Back to the Outback. I saw this movie about a month ago with my wife and kids. We just stumbled upon it on Netflix. Really, really fun, really fascinating, totally fitting for our love of Australia and our Australian community on this channel. We loved it. It was very, very enjoyable. So.
New Zealand has hardly any dangerous animals, or animals period, really. Australia, on the other hand, has the most animals with the most deadly venom. Sure, it's known for its cuddly koalas, wombats, and kangaroos, but many of its native animals will actively try to kill you, from sharks to jellyfish to snakes.
These animals are deadly.
That said, this may all be overhyped. In fact, due to anti-venom inventions, these two horrifying spiders native to Australia haven't killed anyone there since 1979. Australia has one of the highest electoral turnout rates in the world. Why? Well, probably because it's mandatory for citizens there to vote. Not in New Zealand, though. While medical marijuana is legal in both countries, parts of Australia have either decriminalized or straight up legalized it. Hey, speaking of parts, New Zealand is divided into 16 regions. Australia has 6 states, 3 internal territories, and 7 external territories. So what's the difference between states and territories there? Well, states have more freedom to do their own thing. Territories are more under the direct control of the federal government. Hey, speaking of government, while both have a parliamentary system, representative democracies, and constitutional monarchies, Australia is a federation. And speaking of that, New Zealand once had the opportunity to become part of that federation. Yep, it could have been part of Australia, but turned it down. Oh, hey, let's look at some history now, shall we? Humans have lived in Australia up to 64,000 years before they lived in New Zealand. Became the second country in the world to finally let women vote. Oh, and that was the year after Australia became an independent country.
That's right.
Like I said earlier, Australia said New Zealand could join up, but New Zealand was like, nah, man, we're cool. Australia was like, suit yourself, and carried on. Instead, New Zealand earned Dominion status in 1907, which was similar to Australia, so it has pretty much been an independent country ever since as well. Only in the 1900s did the population of both countries really start to grow. And grow they did. Although both today are still sparsely populated. Alright then, for the rest of the video, let's look at the similarities between the two countries.
Here we go.
Due to the aforementioned legacy of the British, the majority of residents of both countries speak English. Maori and New Zealand Sign Language are also official languages in New Zealand. Residents of both countries have different accents, although for outsiders that that may be hard to pick up.
Yeah, I'll admit I don't think I know too well, like an expert, what the differences in accents would be. I know that I've heard, and I think I could lightly tell that, yeah, people from New Zealand do sound a little different from Australia, especially when it comes to slang and maybe ways they deliver the words. But yeah, I'd have to be more versed in that before I could really tell the difference between a lot of people.
Way to tell is how they say their vowels. Aussies tend to draw out vowels compared to Kiwis. According to the World Happiness Index, residents of both are generally among the happiest in the world.
That's awesome.
Probably related to this, both have very low poverty. Both have a higher percentage of residents born in another country. And if you are interested in moving to either, because you want to be happy too, know that both are two of the easiest countries to immigrate to in the world. Because
now, I have heard different opinions on that. That's why you have to take all these videos with a grain of salt. I imagine maybe compared to some countries, they might be semi-easy to get into, but I don't know much at all about New Zealand for immigrating, but I have heard on some forums online that Australia can be pretty tough to immigrate to, especially from the US. So I'm not exactly sure that that's totally feasible, saying that it's easy to immigrate to Australia. But maybe you have different opinions or further knowledge on this that you can weigh in on below.
Because of this high immigration, both are ethnically diverse. While the majority of residents trace their background to Europe, more than 16% of Australians and 12% of New Zealanders trace their ancestry to Asia. New Zealand also still has a large Maori population. Maori culture remains a big part of New Zealand culture.
Trust me, if you go back on my channel, when the first time my wife and I did a reaction together, and we saw a haka ceremony, haka dance. It was incredible. The energy and the passion and the tradition that came through all these Maori people, it was absolutely, honestly, a loss for words. It was absolutely incredible. It was nuts. So, yeah, much respect to New Zealand and the amazing ancient culture that it has. Really, really impressive, really mind-blowing.
Today, both have a similar median household income. The minimum age to drink alcohol in both is 18.
Nice.
Both have areas with weird time zones. Both have flags that are often confused since they're so...
Now, I know the difference, but yeah, these flags, they're very similar. And I'm kind of a flag nerd, so I totally know the difference. The 6 versus the 4 and the red stars versus the white. And of course, they're different shapes as well. Yeah, they are very, very similar. I could see a lot of people who, don't really know much about flags could totally interchange these on accident.
So similar since they both feature the British Union Jack in the top left corner and stars. An easy way to know the difference is that New Zealand stars are red with anger from constantly getting mixed up with Australia's. The ozone layer is thinner above both countries compared to most of the rest of the world. As I said earlier, both are two of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. Australia in particular. Sure, it may account for just over 5% of the world's land area, but it has just 0.3% of the global population. A big reason why is urbanization. Hey, speaking of which, both are two of the most urbanized countries in the world. Odds are, if you live in either country, you live in a city. Both have versions of universal health care. Related to this, both have a really high life expectancy.
That's
the median age in both is about the same regarding violent crime. Both are two of the safest countries in the world.
Jeez.
Both have historically had to deal with lots of invasive species.
How can you argue with both have some of the best universal health care in the world and some of the highest life expectancy, very high ranks on the happiness meter, all these things? I mean, look, you already know this. I know you do, but hear it from this American. I love my country. I love North America. It's a beautiful continent. I love the United States. It's a beautiful country. And I have not, unfortunately, gotten to travel all across the world, but I love how the world is different everywhere you go, and everywhere has its own unique identity. And let me tell you, I really do believe fully, I've said this before, I'll say it again, Australia and New Zealand really got it going on. Good on you guys. You guys are awesome, both of you. I think people across the world really do admire that.
violent crime. Both are two of the safest countries in the
Yeah,
world.
safest
Both
countries
have
in the world, like some of
historically
the
had to
safest.
deal
That's
with
amazing.
Lots of invasive species
Wow.
or non-native types of organisms introduced to an area that become way overpopulated and hurt the local environment. As I said earlier, many people who live in both have recent ancestors from other parts of the world, and those ancestors brought lots of animals with them that had no natural predators. In other words, no one eats them. Because of this, in Australia, they've had to deal with an overpopulation of European rabbits, deer, cane toads, and honeybees, as well as wild herds of cats, goats, and horses.
That's
and
interesting.
believe it or not, Australia is the only country in the world with wild herds of camels. Oh, and
That's
there was that
interesting.
mice plague last year. Goodness
Ooh,
gracious.
oh my
New Zealand
God.
also has its fair share of invasive species. Many of the same ones as Australia, but other standouts like rats, possums, and weasels. But it has been a bit more aggressive getting rid of them in recent years. Residents of both often call the undeveloped areas of their countries, quote, the bush.
The bush.
Rugby is ridiculously popular in both. And of course, there's all the sports rivalries between the two. The biggest probably revolving around rugby and rugby league, of course, but also cricket and netball, all these weird sports down under. Down under is what folks call these two countries since they're, quote, down under most other countries, meaning they're pretty far south, man. Coincidentally, the song Down Under by Men at Work is also the national anthem of Australia. Just kidding.
Yeah, no, it's
shout out to Australian music. No offense, New Zealand, but in my humble opinion, Australia's music is defo way better.
From the tiny, tiny bit I know, yeah, Australian music kicks ass.
Don't believe me? Name one New Zealand band off the top of your head. Exactly. Nope, Lord's not a band. Also, there's this Australian
Dang it,
band.
I do know Lord. But yeah, other than that, I don't know any. I'm sorry. But I do know some Aussie music, a little bit. Way less than I should know. I know there's a lot more than I know. But every bit of Aussie music I know is pretty enjoyable.
Called King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard that wrote a song about me, so that's pretty rad and stuff.
Wow.
And one final thing. In 2006, an Australian tried to sell New Zealand on eBay.
Oh my
He was
God.
unsuccessful. In conclusion,
That's too funny.
while there is indeed a bit of a rivalry overall today between Australia and New Zealand, I think they will always have this special bond due to being on the edge of the globe, far away from most of it
They
all.
got to.
They
They're
really
both so
are
isolated.
two special,
They gotta be
amazing
best buds.
countries. Oh, before I go, I almost forgot. Liam,
Yes, Mr. Beat?
did you happen to get done with your video?
Why, yes, I did, and I'm happy to report that Australia is an island continent.
Well,
There you go.
it's settled then.
So that is Australia and New Zealand compared from Mr. Beat is a channel. Like I said, that will be linked in the description down below if you want to check it out further. Let's hear the comments on this. I think we'll get a lot of comments on this video. I do look forward to seeing them. Australia and New Zealand, very, very fascinating countries, especially from someone across the world. Maybe not to you guys if you live there, but keep in mind from an outside perspective, very, very beautiful, fascinating, and unique countries both Australia and New Zealand are. I've enjoyed learning about them. There's much more for me personally to learn about New Zealand. I have some awesome people from New Zealand that watch my channel and comment, so I appreciate you guys. I know I tend to focus on Australia more just because there's so much, a plethora of knowledge and facts and everything to learn about it. But there really is about it in New Zealand too. So yeah, I found this very, very entertaining. Most of it sounded pretty cool, pretty legit. Some things I questioned. So tell me what you learned down below and what maybe you thought was wrong. I definitely could see a couple things there that were debatable. But overall, this was very enjoyable. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please throw a thumbs up on there. If you learned something and enjoy yourself, it will help the video out. I appreciate it. Subscribe for more stuff like this, of course. Also, check that description out for this original video and other ways you can support my channel. Remember that my name is Ian. You're watching IWrocker. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later.